Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another edition of the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. Gus Kattengell and Jim Eichenhofer with you from Pelicans.com. Jim, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Gus. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic in this aspect, too. We get to chat with a head coach who, over there in Birmingham, head coach of the Birmingham Squadron, TJ Saint, is going to be joining us, and he's going to get to talk to us about some of the challenges of what it's like in being a G League coach. And what I mean by that is ever-changing lineups and just getting guys to be fundamentally sound and preparing them for the next level, but at the same time, trying to win games.
Yeah, and I like his approach. I mean, he definitely goes into everything with the mindset of we can only control what we can control. And, I mean, I know you have to be that way as a G League coach. It just comes with the territory. It's part of the equation. It's like when I come in, I know I'm going to have to type on my laptop. That it's just part of the job.
Right.
So, yeah, it was fun talking to him about the season that they've had so far, and I'm getting ready for the G League showcase later this week.
No doubt. And, of course, it is Wednesday, which means it's Western Conference Wednesday. So you're going to talk about, a team in the Western Conference and a team that's, stocking up, stocking down, things of that nature. We'll have some fun with that here as well. I want to start out, though, with what we saw last night, and I tuned in. I checked it out, the NBA Cup. That's right. We had a couple of games in the month of November. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Court was different. Uniforms were different. Had to win your pod in advance. You should know this. The Pels made it to Vegas last year to the semifinals. And this year, the finals were the Bucks and the Thunder. How surprised were you by the dominating win by the Bucks, a 97-81?
I should say that I was at least a little bit surprised, but considering if you go back and listen to the tape, John DeShazier and I both picked the Bucks to win the NBA Cup. So once we got to the quarterfinal round, at least it wasn't like we picked them out of the 30 teams. But once we got to the knockout stage, I thought I picked the Bucks. Going into the game against OKC, I might have leaned a little bit towards the Thunder because it seemed like the Thunder had been playing a little bit better than Milwaukee lately. But I mean, you know what, Gus? It was a perfect example, though, of what I've talked about a bunch of times where OKC had a terrible three-point shooting night, and with the volatility of the three-point shot, you don't know when you're going to have that night where you go 4 for 30 or whatever. I know at one point they were 3 for 24 or something like that. You can't control for that, so you just hope that the worst three-point shooting night of your season doesn't happen in Game 7 of a playoff series or with the NBA Cup at stake. But that was a huge part of why the game went the way that it did. That it's so difficult to overcome that level of poor three-point shooting. It just seemed like OKC couldn't make a three-point shot when they needed it.
It's what we've been talking about. It's what the NBA is today, whether you like it, whether you're not, which was interesting because Adam Silver, the commissioner, was actually asked about it. Reporters had about a half hour with him on Tuesday to discuss a myriad of topics, the cup, the league, where they stand. Three-point shooting was a topic. And look, we've discussed it here on the podcast. I know I text you guys on the side with JD. I'm like, it's too much three-point shooting. JD's like, nah, that's what the game, adapt or, or die and all that stuff. But I bring it up from this aspect of it. The league is aware of it. The commissioner's looking at it. But what do you do about it? He kind of talked about the style of play, eliminating the three or moving it back. Is that really going to help all those different things? But I guess the point is, though, Jim, to what we saw yesterday, if you make threes, you're going to have a shot to win a game. If you don't make threes, you better do something else really, really well to combat that. I mean, that's just what the game is today.
And I think to the general point, too, I mean, for me personally, I don't dislike that the three-point shooting has gone up a lot, but I think just the extent of it sometimes does make me think that it's gone overboard. To me, from a general standpoint, the team that wins the championship in the NBA, the team that's the best team in the league, should be good at a lot of different things. I feel like when I picture basketball, maybe like when we were growing up, that was more of the case. It wasn't like you could just specialize in one thing and that would overwhelm the other parts of the game. I feel like Boston is a great team, and I'm not saying this to diminish anything that they've done. I would kill for their level of achievement the last few years. But, I mean, they win some games like purely from three-point shooting because they're just so good at it.
Yeah. And
the math dictates that you have a game where you go 25 for 40 from three, and the chances that you're going to win that game are like 90-something%. So I think one of the ideas that people have come up with is eliminating the corner threes because that's the easiest three-point shot. It's closer to the basket than the other threes are 23 feet, 9 inches away. The corners are only 22 feet. So, I mean, I think that's one possible, rule that they can add to it. So I would like to see there be more of a balance between you have to be a good defensive team, you have to be a good rebounding team, you have to be able to shoot from mid-range, you have to be able to get to the basket. I think if it becomes the case where, I mean, we're seeing teams shoot more than half of their shots from three-point range.
Right.
It used a few years ago. I remember when Houston was the first team to do that over the course of an entire season. People were like, "Oh man, this is starting to get overboard." Now we're getting to the point where there's multiple teams that are doing that. And at what point do you say? I mean, we get to the point where 70% of the shots in the league, 80% of the shots in the league are threes. I think almost everyone at that point will be like, yeah, I think this has got it. We got to swing the balance back the other way.
Call me a funny duddy, which is weird because I'm not the oldest, right? That's watched it. I'm only 48. I'll be 49 next month. But to me that, and we can go back and forth on this. When people feel so, is it skill? Is it not skill? I mean, it just feels like you're just jacking up shots. And there was a sequence, I think a week or so ago, I think before LeBron took a hibernation break. He's back now, though, just so you know.
Great.
But it was a sequence of, like, literally he dribbled three, times past the half-court line, jack up a three, no good, long rebound. The other team would jack up a three, long good, no rebound. And it's tough to kind of go into it. So I don't know. Do you move the three-point arc back to where it makes it more difficult? And back to your point, you have to rebound, do that. I saw something interesting. Somebody posted this on social media, and it was an open-ended question. How would you fix it? Like, what do you want to see? And I was looking at the comments. One was interesting to me because you know me. What do I love? What do I crave that this Pelicans
Dunking.
Yes. He said, what about making a dunk 4 points? Bringing that element back to the game.
Wow.
If you dunk it, you get 4 points.
I'm not sure if I've thought about that or willing to go there, but
I know that's kind of probably starting, in extra innings, a runner on second, and all that. But bringing the element of the paint back into contention somehow, some way, or do you make a dunk a 3-pointer? I don't know.
The one thing that I think we can go down the road on in terms of, you mentioned the possibility of moving the line back further. So I think there's two things that people have to understand. One, the analytics is a big reason why there's more three-point shooting in the NBA because obviously 3 points is worth more than 2. But also there's more good three-point shooters and competent, capable three-point shooters in the league. So you add those two things together. You have teams out there with their analytic department that are saying we need to shoot more threes. But you also have more guys in the league that can do it than there was 15, 20 years ago. So you take those two things together, and that's a big chunk of why we're seeing so many more threes taken. If you move the line back, the number of players in the league that are capable of shooting, say, 40%, which is right there at like elite three-point shooting, that number goes down. So if the number of guys that are capable of making, they say they move the line to 25 feet, if the number of guys that can do that at a decent level drops, I think you would see that naturally because the analytics departments would be like, yeah, we still want to take a lot of threes, but now these guys' percentages are so much lower that now it doesn't make sense to take 45 threes in a game. Maybe now if we shoot 30, that makes more sense based on the percentages. So I could definitely see how if you move the line back, that would effectively, to some degree, change the amount of three-point shooting.
Maybe it's worth looking at like in a preseason schedule, just trying to find something to see if it happens, get some data on that. Because to your point, the Bucks took 81 shots last night. 40 were threes. So to me, it's just volume.
Right.
I mean, it's volume. I mean, how many people, I know some of the guys off the bench that shot 5 or 6 3-pointers. Gary Trent Jr. had 6 attempts. AJ Green, 5 attempts. So when you're looking at it, just volume at some point. And to your point, though, the Thunder, 86 shots total, 32 were threes. There were 5 of 32. The Bucks were 17 of 40. So you got outshot 51-15. So that brings up your point. Analytics is going to tell you, well, We shot on volume. Half of our shots were three-pointers, but we produced 51 points, and they produced 15.
And there's going to be games where relying so heavily on the three-point shot cost you. But if you look at the analytics and you study it even briefly, over the course of time, over the course of 82 games, over the course of 100+ if you make the playoffs and go deep, it makes so much more sense to take a lot of threes instead of not that many.
Yeah.
So it's just something that it's not going to change. If the terms of play and the stats and the shooting percentages stay the way that they are, and there's also more guys coming into the NBA that can shoot threes, because if you're a college player right now and you just started your freshman year and you like, I want to play in the NBA and I'm a pretty good shooter, you're going to just keep working on that. So because it pays. And so, I mean, the market is going to dictate the talent. So, I mean, if it's going to just continue on this trajectory unless they change the rules, they eliminate the corner threes or make the three-point line further out from the basket.
Just thought we'd bring it up. It was interesting. I don't know if we even talked that long about it, but look, it's when the commissioner's answering questions and he's talking about it and they're looking at it, and you take a team in the Western Conference who is very good. We just talked about it on Pelicans Weekly with Graf yesterday. He thinks they are the best team in the Western Conference, OKC. Then they get smoked, and it comes down to three-point shooting. You discuss it. And that's kind of one of the things that we wanted to do. The other thing we wanted to do, too, is we get you ready for our conversation with TJ Saints. Again, he's the head coach of the Birmingham Squadron. Is one of the things that Jim has brought up all season long. And I kind of joked with him at lunch earlier in the week. I said, can we make the all two-way player starting five? You know, like you did the all-pro team, and it's a starting five. And then Jim giggled. And he goes, well, the problem is it'd be pretty much all Pels,
right?
Because it's not the norm.
They would have probably three guys on the team. I think Charlotte has a guy that has been productive as well as a rebounder, but yeah, I mean, it would be probably 3/5 of the team definitely would be Pelicans.
In 10 seconds, for those that don't know, what's a two-way player?
A two-way contract it's basically a G League contract where you can spend 50 games with your NBA franchise, and then the rest of the time over the course of the regular season, you spend with the G League affiliate.
Okay. Who are the two-way players for the New Orleans Pelicans?
They are Brandon Boston, Jamal Cain, and Trey Jemison.
You mean the guys right across the street right now?
Yes, the guys that have been here the entire time. They've been here the whole season.
Is that the norm?
Not at all. Yeah, theoretically, they would have spent a part of the first 2+ months of the season in Birmingham, but instead they've spent zero time in Birmingham so far because they've been needed here with all of the injuries. I mean, not only have those guys been needed in terms of, we need guys in case there's foul trouble or injuries, and then we got guys at the end of the bench that we can sub in case there's an emergency situation. Hasn't even been that. It's been more like, okay, you're going to start some games. Brandon Boston has started. Jamal Cain's been in the rotation pretty constantly. Trey Jemison as well. I mean, there's been games where the Pelicans have only had 9 or 10 guys in uniform. So, I mean, no matter who you are, no matter how little experience you have, no matter what your contract situation is, you can expect to play when there's that few players available. So, I mean, that's been a big part of it. So, and one of the things that we talk about with TJ Saint is just how he hasn't had his players there. And there's a couple stats that kind of illustrate to me the significance of the two-way contracts that the Pelicans have had during the regular season so far. Now, we talked about this a few weeks ago, and I think a few weeks ago, the Pelicans were at the point where their stats were, their minutes played and their points scored by two-way contract guys was so much higher than everyone else in the league. So now that we're in, mid-December, you're thinking, okay, well, I'm sure that's changed since then, right? It can't be as drastic as it was a few weeks ago because all these other teams across the league have had injuries and their situations have changed. Well, guess what? Not really. So the Pelicans have had 400 points scored by two-way contract players this season. Brandon Boston by himself has 296 of those 400. So second place in the NBA, if you look at all other teams in the league and you look at how many points they've gotten from two-way contract guys, the Wizards are second with 186 points from two-way contract guys. So by that math, you can easily determine that Brandon Boston's 296 points, not only the most of any player on a two-way contract across the league, but more than every other 29 other teams, all of their G League players combined, he scored more points than all of them. He has 296. The Wizards combination of guys has 186. So there's also 5 teams in the NBA that have 5 points or less from their two-way contract guys over the course of the season. The Timberwolves only have 1 point from a two-way contract guy. The Pelicans have 400 with 296 from Brandon Boston. So just to give you an example, I mean, the vast majority of the teams in the league do not rely. It's not that they don't rely heavily on the two-way contract guys. It's that they don't rely on them at all. So it's just kind of just sets up some of what we discussed with TJ about the fact that he hasn't had the two-way contract guys. If you're a G League head coach, you would think you expect to have them to some degree, and the Squadron haven't had them at all so far.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, let's hear that conversation now with Birmingham Squadron head coach, Mr. TJ Saint. All right, time now to welcome in our guest for today's podcast, Mr. TJ Saint, head coach of the Birmingham Squadron in his third season over there in Alabama. Sir, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks, good for having me on, guys.
Yep, for sure, man. How's the season going so far this year?
It's going pretty good. We've had a lot of different circumstances to push through, but our guys are playing together. We're playing the right way, and we're improving, and that's what I like to see up here.
You know, I think it's known among pretty much all basketball fans and people that follow the G League that players coming in and out is just a part of the equation. It's just something that you expect that you're going to have to manage as a coach in the G League, that there's going to be roster changes, there's going to be lineup alterations and that kind of thing. But I think for people who really closely follow the Pelicans, I would think that fans would wonder, you know, I'm curious, you know, when the NBA team that you were affiliated with has the situation that they've had where they've had a lot of injuries, they've had to call up guys. How has that affected your season so far with the Squadron?
Well, this is my sixth season in the G League in general, third as head coach, and it's kind of become the environment or the atmosphere that I'm used to. So it's almost no different than any year. The number one thing we focus on, or I focus on, is getting our culture right, our team essence, as we call it, making sure everybody's pulling in the right direction, everybody's on time, all the details are covered, and we're working on the right things. And then secondly, we focus individually on their improvement. We put together individual player development plans, give them 2 or 3 goals throughout the season, and then we kind of come together as a team and do the best we can on the floor. But to be honest, this is just kind of my philosophy on it. I just coach the team that is up here in Birmingham appropriately as I possibly can, no matter who it is, and that's kind of our focus.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense in terms of, you know, coaches always talk about control what you can control. And it seems like really that's the only thing you can do. There's nothing that you can change as far as the player availability and that kind of thing. But, I mean, I know there's probably – I mean, you could answer this. I mean, you probably don't think too far ahead as you're managing a team either because you don't know exactly who's going to be there. But, I mean, do you, at least to some extent, when you have training camp or when a season starts, do you expect as a G League head coach that, for example, the 3 guys that are on 2-way contracts, that you would have them on the court more, and then you just kind of have to adjust to the fact that, you know, I think the Pelicans have probably used their 2-way contract guys more than maybe any team in the league so far.
Yeah, right. We haven't actually seen any of those guys, the 2-way guys this year. We've seen Antonio Reeves for a couple of games and Carlo Makovic for 9. And I think when we set out in the summer and we build our G League roster in general, we're building it around the developmental guys that the Pelicans are going to send us. And it's a pretty clear plan from that standpoint. Now, when you don't have those guys, it's just opportunity for our actual G League roster guys to get more minutes and improve daily anyway. So we've had to change some things on offense. It's actually allowed us to get kind of creative, which I think as the season goes on, it's kind of showed us things we might not have gotten to naturally if we had everybody, but can kind of pay dividends down the line. So you're always looking for silver linings and adjustments as a coach throughout the season. And I think our guys have done a pretty good job of bringing it every night and every day to practice and games.
You know, one of the things that we wanted to ask you about is later this week, you guys are going to be participating in the G League Showcase, and you're going to play a couple games in Orlando. One of the things that took place last season at the G League Showcase for you guys was that Trey Jemison had a really good performance, and that led to him, you know, signing with an NBA team on a 10-day contract, and then he later went to Memphis, and then obviously people know that he's back with the Pelicans now. But what was that experience like as far as, you know, him being able to perform so well, and what do you look forward to about just this event in general?
Yeah, Trey had an amazing 25 games overall with us. He and I are very close. I'm glad that he got the 10-day from Washington and then was two-wayed by Memphis, and now we obviously have him as a two-way in New Orleans. He, as a rookie, he brought it every day. He was kind of our heartbeat, if you will, vocal leader last year. Whether it was a good game, bad game, he really brought it. And a quick story on him is one of the nights up here, his final game with us, ironically, we're playing the Iowa Wolves, and they had gone small and put Leonard Miller at the 5, and he was Trey actually wasn't appropriately guarding the right way, so I had to take him out with about 6-7 minutes to go in the game and switch up the coverage. He ended up not finishing the game. In his mind, he didn't have a great performance, and he was really down. But that night, he gets called up. He and I talk, and we're crying on the phone together, and it's just a really cool story of what he's been able to accomplish in a short time in his NBA career. But he put in the work, and it's not one day. Like that Iowa game doesn't define his whole path of success, but he worked for it and he earned it.
You know, it's funny that people that listen to this show all the time will remember that Trey actually told us that same story, but just from the other side of the equation.
Of the season,
He didn't mention the specific part about, you know, what you talked about in terms of defense and what he was doing at that part of it. But he did tell Gus and I, he said, you know, I was really disappointed. I think he was driving somewhere and he was really dejected because he didn't have a good game and things didn't go that well. So the last thing he was expecting was an NBA call up. So kind of cool to hear the other part of that story. You know, one thing I was wondering too about
he might have also been mad at me for pulling him at the end of the game.
Yeah, he didn't mention that part to us, but yeah. One thing I just thought of too is you know, as Trey being a guy that was so familiar with that area and went to UAB and stuff like that, did he have were there guys that were asking him for, you know, advice of like places to go to eat? It seemed like he would have been the local expert on the team that everyone could kind of go to for advice.
Oh yeah, even I did. I mean, I've been to Birmingham. This is my 4th year overall, but he had some hidden gems restaurant wise. But I think it was pretty cool to say when I was talking to him about when he was coming here, his apartment, I believe at UAB was like a few blocks from the apartments we get the guys here. So for him to go to high school in Hoover in Alabama, here at UAB, and then start his career professionally with the Squadron was just a really cool story overall.
You know, you guys have a few players as well that have played for the Squadron and have at least had a little bit of experience with the Pelicans in terms of names that people, maybe not players that Pelicans fans are super familiar with, but they know the names from, they got to play in some regular season games last year here and there. But who are some of the players that have excelled this season so far for you guys that are off to really good starts that people might know a little bit about from their Pelicans affiliation?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would start even with Carlo Makovic. I think you saw some improvement with him, especially protecting the rim here. And we kind of did some different stuff, setting small pick and rolls and spread him out to kind of show his ability to shoot it as a shooting 5. So I think he did a pretty good job in his first stint here. Keon Brooks is somebody who's a rookie with us out of Washington who is improving very, very fast. I mean, one of the fastest improving rookies I've ever coached, to be quite honest. Isaiah Brockington's back for a second year. You know, he played on a 10-day up in Toronto with the Pelicans last year.
Yep.
He brings a lot of juice. He's great for our culture, and I think he's gotten a lot better in penetrating and finding the right player or finding the right teammate who's open. Jalen Crutcher is kind of our heartbeat as our point guard. He's done a great job and taken on the ownership of being a better defender this year, so we're really happy with a lot of those guys, yeah.
Speaking with TJ Saint, head coach of the Birmingham Squadron here on the New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Coach, something I wanted to ask you that's interested to me is, obviously as we get closer to February All-Star games and things of that nature, a lot of emphasis is kind of put on, you know, just players and players that you see from overseas development. And I saw this little chitter-chatter at the beginning of the season. Are players developed better? Are they more fundamentally sound in Europe as opposed to what's happening around here? When you look at the G League and its importance to, I think, NBA teams moving forward with whether it's the new CBA or what have you, how important is it that there's a place to develop? Because we all would love somebody to come in and be a 20, 30-point starter in the NBA, but you still can develop on that too. Do you feel personally, and do you feel that the G League is a place to develop some players and get some opportunities to play?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you see the two guys, I mean, one of them's not on the Pelicans anymore, but we had two guys in our program prior, Najee Marshall as a two-way and Jose Alvarado when he was a two-way, and they've both been converted. Obviously, and now Najee's with Dallas. I think the G League is fantastic. You know, prior to this, I was with the Detroit Pistons, and I had never really had any G League experience. I think as long as the culture and the accountability is really high in the G League and you have a staff who understands and who has been at the NBA level of what it actually takes on a daily basis, let alone a guy gets a 10-day or a two-way, they're on a really thin margin. Like, they have to act the right way. They have to perform in a very short amount of time, or a cut could happen very quickly. And I think that's the type of environment we have here. You know, I'm pretty hard on the guys with also keeping the future version of themselves in kind of the forefront of their minds. But you have to hold them accountable, because we don't know which team is going to call you up, and I have to prepare you for any coach in the league, whoever you're going to go play for. So we put them in the systems that the Pelicans use. We critique a few things because our personnel is obviously different, and we hold them accountable to their dreams, and that's kind of worked here in the past. I think we have 14 call-ups in our history as a program in 3 years.
Yeah, that's excellent. You know, Coach, you talked about, you know, some of the success that the Pelicans have had with guys that have been on two-way contracts in the past, and obviously the three players that are in New Orleans that have spent the whole season here instead of Birmingham. But I think it's important for people. I think people have, and I would maybe put myself a little bit in this category as well, people have developed a better understanding of how the two-way contracts work. But in terms of looking forward over the rest of this season, you know, I don't mean specifics with the three guys, but just in general, can you kind of describe for people what the rules are in terms of, you know, how much time they can spend up here, and, you know, what the rules are that dictate, you know, the how they go back and forth between the NBA team and the G League team?
Yeah, I believe there's 50 games in the NBA that they can technically be a part of as a max of the two-way. And then other than that, it's pretty dependent on what the NBA needs, the NBA team needs. You know, we're the Birmingham Squadron, but we're here to support the Pelicans in any possible way. So, you know, when we get notice, if any of those guys are going to come down, you know, be ready for them. And I don't know all three of them totally, but I've coached against Brandon and Jamal in the end, or when they played on the Clippers and then the Sioux Falls Skyforce. Really, really good players. And then we've obviously talked about Trey Jemison, who was here. So we'll support the Pelicans in any way possible, and we'll be ready for those guys to develop them in the case that they are sent here.
So, and didn't at one point, wasn't the requirement or the rule a days thing instead of a games thing? Did they change that just to kind of make it simpler, to kind of simplify the rule behind, you know, how much time that they can spend with the NBA team?
Yeah, I believe they did. And with the Pelicans, you know, injury situation for the first part of the season, we'll see how that kind of counterbalances. But, yeah, yet to this point, we have yet to see any of those guys, just the two assignment players in Carlo and Antonio.
You've got to be the only team in the G League where that's the case, correct?
Possibly. I haven't done the research
I guess
on that.
We'll go back through and look through that and see. I wanted to kind of do a search of the two-way contract guys. I know that for the vast majority of the season, I'm sure this is still the case, the Pelicans were by far leading the NBA in terms of minutes by two-way contract guys and points and stuff like that. But yeah, that is interesting. It's definitely seems like a pretty unique situation, because you don't usually, when a player comes up from the G League on a two-way contract and is productive, you hear a lot about it because it's pretty rare. So I mean, it definitely doesn't happen too much across the NBA. It is pretty unique.
Yeah, we've played against, I'll tell you this, we've played against a lot of two-ways so far in our 14 games. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, any ideas as to how all those injuries have taken place here with the Pelicans? We've gone anywhere from voodoos to Kerrs to what have you stuff. Have you ever seen a situation where a team goes through that many injuries? Everybody gets nicked up to this level, Coach?
No, it's not something I can recall. Yeah, personally, we kind of just focus on the guys we have up here, and hopefully, you know, the NBA guys come back and get healthy, and, you know, we'll obviously be ready to develop the guys they send us. And it just gives our guys up here, our E10s and our standard G League contract players, a chance to really play more minutes than they usually would. And so that's a bonus for them. And should we get the infusion of the two ways or some assignment players down the road, I think we'll have a better team overall because these guys got a lot of experience in the first part of our season that could really bolster our group as we make a playoff push in the regular season.
Interesting. A different byproduct on that, too, because I think there's something else that's interesting is when you hear players and coach up here talk about having to deal with, different starting lineups, different players coming in and out. And it's kind of similar to what you were talking about with trying to coach the guys you have there, depending on what the other club in New Orleans is trying to do. You just coach who's there at that time and try to make it work. It's always not that easy, is it, to try to have that continuity?
Well, it's not that easy, but again, it's kind of what I've gotten used to in the last 6 years, so it's kind of normalized for me. And, you go through it even in the NBA, like certain things happen, like David Lee, I believe, got hurt 10 years ago or 11 years ago, and then they started playing Draymond Green with the Golden State Warriors. And I don't know if that necessarily would have happened had David Lee gone down. And so who knows what's going to happen with the rest of our season up here in Birmingham. But some of the minutes these guys have gotten early have kind of infused a different way for us to run our offense, things we wouldn't have thought before. And let's say we have a couple two ways, or they get taken away, or we have an injury up here. Those guys are going to be more ready in big spots and big moments and big games to try to perform. And I think there's a silver lining in that. And just from my point of view as a head coach in the G League, you're always looking through the developmental lens. And so it's been a pretty good start for us.
I hear you. Coach, appreciate giving us a little bit of your time here.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Coach.
Head coach TJ Saint of the Birmingham Squadron. And our thanks to head coach TJ Saint, head coach of the Birmingham Squadron, for his time there. Pretty interesting to kind of hear, not only his journey and him being there 6 years now, how he looks at it, how the G League's about being, developmental, and it's true, but the challenges of, hey, we're counting on some of those guys to kind of be on here, and, they're not there just yet. But it was a good conversation.
It was. And, I mean, by the way, too, one thing we should mention is they play Thursday against Wisconsin at 5 o'clock in the G League Showcase. These games are in Orlando. They play Sunday against Delaware at 12:30. That game is on ESPN+. So if you want to get a chance to check out the Squadron, the game Thursday is on Roku, by the way. All of the games in the G League Showcase are on national TV to some extent in some form. So if you want a chance to watch Birmingham, you'll be able to do that over the next few days. And by the way, their next home game isn't until January 10th against Capital City. So, we complain sometimes about the schedule, but the Birmingham Squadron actually have 2 games in Orlando, and then they have 4 road games in a row at the end of December and early January. So their next 6 games are all outside of town. But then by January 10th, which is about 3 weeks from now, they have a home game against Capital City.
There you go. All right, let's get to it. It is Wednesday, which Mr. Eichenhofer means only one thing. Cue up Mallory.
All right, y'all. Now it's time for Western Conference Wednesday. Mr. Eichenhofer will tell us whose stock is up and whose stock is down. So let's get started. Jim, what is our team to keep an eye on for this week?
The team to watch over the next 7 days is the Minnesota Timberwolves. They've been playing some good basketball lately. They're now 14-11 and in 7th place in the West. Their schedule this week, I think, is the main reason I picked them. On Thursday, they host the New York Knicks, which means the return of Karl Anthony Towns to Minneapolis. So I know a lot of people will have their eyes on that game. That's also a TNT game. Saturday, the Timberwolves host Golden State, and then Monday, they play at Atlanta, which, as we know, the Hawks are one of the teams that have been hot around the league lately. And, by the way, Gus, I want to try to start tying some of these Western Conference Wednesday teams into the Pelicans. My dream is still alive that we'll be able to do that by talking about, how far the Pelicans are behind Team X in the standings, but got a ways to go before we get to that point. But for now, Pelicans actually haven't played the Timberwolves yet this year. On January 7th, that's the first time that these teams will play each other. That game is in New Orleans, and then there's 2 games in March that will be consecutive games in a baseball series at the Target Center in Minnesota. Last week's team to watch, too, was the Lakers. They went 1-1. They lost at Minnesota, then they beat the Grizzlies in L.A. LeBron came back from his vacation, and the Pelicans have 2 games left against them, March 4th in L.A. and April 4th in L.A., so those are 2 games that the Pelicans will have in the latter part of the season. As far as stock up goes, I'm going with the Denver Nuggets. They've won 3 games in a row. They're now up to 5th place in the West, which I think as of a couple weeks ago, they would have taken that for sure. They would have said, we're in the top 6. Heck yeah. They had 2 games. They beat the Clippers and the Kings. So the game against Sacramento was pretty interesting. A lot of drama in that one. And stock down, I'm going with Golden State Warriors. They're 14-11 now, which is 8th place in the West, but they've lost 8 of their last 10 games now. They started the season 12-3, and it's interesting to know, a lot of things have gone against the Pelicans this season.
Right.
It's also interesting to note that during the 12-3 stretch that the Warriors had, they played the Pelicans 3 times. So New Orleans had to play them when they were red hot, as opposed to the Warriors have gone 2-8 in their last 10. So also not great for New Orleans. And that season series actually will end March 28th in New Orleans when the Warriors make their final trip to the Smoothing King Center. And that will wrap up the this week's Western Conference Wednesday, Gus.
All right, there it is. And, of course, Pels with another one of those funky schedules with not a lot of games. You got Houston tomorrow on the road, and then we get right back at it and starts to get really busy here starting this weekend. A back-to-back. Pelicans will take on the Knicks, a team we just saw in New York a little bit ago. You just spoke about the Denver Nuggets. They'll be here as well. Then this is this 5-game homestand to end the month of December. And, Jim, I don't know if you've peaked at January.
I know there's a lot of games.
17.
Yeah.
How many days in January?
31.
17 games in 31 days.
Okay.
Couple of back-to-backs.
I actually haven't really looked that much at the January schedule.
You know why I did?
For my own health, for my own sanity.
My birthday's in the middle of the month.
Okay.
So, my wife was like, well, when do you want to go out? For your birthday dinner. And I was like, well, let's take a look at the week.
Well, you're going to have to find a strategic place that you can.
Yeah. Well, I work on my birthday. So, I mean,
is it? Okay.
Yeah, it's just the whole thing. But, so I'm like, you know what? See a lot of squares with team, initials on there. And I just started counting using a very scientific method, my finger on each square. And
fingers and toes.
I counted 17. So 17 games in 31 days. 30 seconds. Does that seem like a lot? I mean, it seems like a pretty busy month.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does. But I mean, I know there's a few back-to-backs. I mean, there has to be if there's 17 games. There's a few backs. There's a few Tuesday, Wednesday back-to-backs if I recall from looking at the little grid of it. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. I know they start with 2 games against Washington. There's a game against Miami and then there's 2 against Washington.
3 back-to-backs.
That's about as far as I've gotten in my head. At some point, I usually have most of the schedule memorized. But yeah, that's as far as I know, that Miami and then 2 Wizards games.
Rest up.
Yeah, I'll be ready.
That would be my.
You know what? We're getting a good rest right now.
No,
We're getting a good break from games.
I hear you.
I'm trying to get recharged here and be ready for Thursday's game against Houston.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, that's Mr. Jim Eichenhofer. If you want to catch all of his stuff, of course, Pelicans.com. He has everything before the game, leading into the game, and then after the game. And then we will see you again on Friday, a radio roundtable.
Yes, we're going to have John DeShazer and Aaron Summers, and we're going to be talking a lot about the 5-game homestand that starts the next day, Saturday, against the New York Knicks.
Looking forward to it. All right, thank you so much, as always, for tuning in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Until Friday, we'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcasts. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.